Need to check the list of used names carefully before writing. The names to avoid: Walter, Derek, Claudette, Harold, Raymond, Lily, Marcus, Evelyn, Beverly, Diane, Conrad, Preston, Earl, Carver, Darlene, Terrence, Keisha, Nia, Sandra, Joe, Clifton, Rochelle, Tyus, Petra, Gordon, Alton, Patricia, Franklin, Odom, Miriam, Ingrid, Hale, Loretta, Devin, Curtis, Franklin, Odom, Miriam, Ingrid, Hale, Loretta, Devin, Noel, Herschel, Brendan, Agnes, Isaiah Okafor, Lionel, Simone, Arthur, Theo, Dion, Vanessa, Mrs. Okafor, Reginald, Renata, Celeste, Donovan, Fletcher, Bria, Gloria, Damon, Portia, Beatrice, Nadine, Elliot, Renee, Delbert, Leonard, Emmett, Ruby. Now I'll write the story with all new names. My father's hands never smelled like cologne. They smelled like iron and solvent and something older than both. Something you couldn't name until you were grown and you understood what a man looks like after 40 years of honest work. I grew up watching those hands. Big hands with knuckles that had been split and healed so many times they had their own geography. Hands that fixed things. Hands that built things. Hands that held mine when I was small enough to be scared of the dark. His name is Chester Miles. He turned 72 last March, and he still keeps a rag tucked in his back pocket out of habit, even though he hasn't worked a shop floor in 6 years. Retired now, moves a little slower, but when he walks into a room, he still fills it, not with noise, not with attitude, just with presence. The kind you can only get from a man who spent his whole life doing what he said he was going to do. I am his son. My name is Owen. I work in logistics. I manage a distribution center on the east side of Columbus, Ohio. Nothing glamorous, but it's steady, and I built it myself. And my father is proud of me, and that has always been enough. I want to tell you about a night that almost broke something between my father and me. Not because of anything my father did, because of something I allowed to happen, slowly, without meaning to, the way you allow a small leak to keep dripping until one day you look down and the floor is rotted through. My wife's name is Priscilla. We met 11 years ago through a mutual friend at a cookout. She was smart and quick-witted and laughed at the right things. Her family is from the north side, Worthington, specifically, and her parents, Dwight and Marlene, had done very well for themselves. Her father was a retired orthodontist. Her mother ran a nonprofit. They had a nice house and a finished basement, and they took vacations to places I had to look up on a map. Good people, I thought, just different from what I came from. My father grew up in Macon, Georgia, came north at 19 with a duffel bag and $40, and got a job at a fabrication plant the second week he was in Columbus. He worked that plant for 31 years. He bought a house on Sullivant Avenue, raised me and my sister Adeze in that house, fixed every broken thing in it with his own hands, and when he retired he was the senior floor supervisor over a crew of 22 men who would have walked through a wall for him. That is the man we are talking about. Priscilla and I married 8 years ago. The first few years were fine. Good even. My father liked her. He used to say she had sharp eyes, meant as a compliment coming from him. And she was respectful to him then. Warm, even. But somewhere around year 4 or 5 something shifted. I couldn't point to the exact moment. It happened the way weather changes. Gradual, then all at once. I started noticing small things. The way her voice got careful when my father came up in conversation. The way she'd find a reason to be somewhere else when he called. She started making comments, little ones, almost throwaway, about how he told the same stories too many times. About how he smelled like the garage where he used to work, even though he hadn't worked there in years. About how he didn't fit with certain situations. I let it go. I should not have let it go, but I told myself it was just friction, just adjustment, just two different worlds learning to coexist. I was wrong about all of it. The real thing, the thing I am actually here to tell you about, happened in October. Every year, Priscilla's family hosts a big dinner for her parents' anniversary. It's not quite a party, not quite a formal affair, somewhere between the two. Dwight and Marlene invite their friends, their church community, some of her cousins, colleagues. It's held at their house, and it is always, I will admit, a very well-run evening. Good food. Flowers on the table. The kind of gathering where people dress nicely and everyone is on their best behavior. I had assumed, without ever directly saying so, that my father was invited. He had come the year before. He'd sat with an older gentleman named Rodney, who turned out to have grown up 2 counties over from my father in Georgia. They'd talked for 2 hours straight and parted like old friends. I thought that went well. I thought things were fine. 3 days before the dinner, I was in the kitchen going through some mail when I heard Priscilla on the phone in the other room. She thought I had gone back out to the car. I hadn't. I heard her say, "He's just not a good fit for this kind of thing, Mama. You know how Daddy's colleagues are. Chester is, I don't know how to say this, he's just not at that level, and honestly, he smells like he just came in from a shop every time. It makes people uncomfortable." I stood there with an electric bill in my hand, and I did not move. She kept going. "I'm just going to tell Owen it's a smaller gathering this year. He'll understand. Chester doesn't need to be there." I put the electric bill down on the counter very carefully. I walked to the back of the house. I sat on the edge of the bed in the dark for a while. I want to be honest with you about what I felt in that moment, because I think it matters. I wasn't shaking. I wasn't hot with anger the way I might have been when I was younger. What I felt was something heavier and quieter than anger. It was grief, almost. Grief for something I had been choosing not to see for a long time. Because this, what I had just heard, this was not new. This was just the first time it had been said out loud where I could hear it. My father smelled like a shop. My father, who used to carry me on his shoulders to the hardware store on Saturday mornings. My father, who taught me to change my own oil because he said a man should know how his own car works. My father, who worked double shifts the semester I got behind on tuition and never once mentioned it to me until I was 34 years old and found out by accident. That man, he smells like a shop. He's not at that level. He makes people uncomfortable. I did not confront Priscilla that night. I knew if I did it then, I would say things I could not take back and I would lose the thread of what I actually needed to do. So I waited. The next morning she came to me over coffee and told me the dinner was going to be a little more intimate this year, closer family and a few of her parents' oldest friends. She said it might be better if my father sat this one out. I looked at her for a long moment. I said, "Okay." She looked a little surprised that I didn't push back. I think she expected resistance. I gave her nothing to push against. What I did instead was call my father. "Hey, Pop, you free Saturday evening?" He said he was. He asked what I had in mind. I said, "I thought we'd do something. Just us. I'll come to the house. I'll bring dinner." He was quiet for a second, and then he said, "Everything all right, son." My father has always been able to hear things I don't say. I don't know how. Maybe all fathers can. I told him everything was fine. I told him I just wanted to spend some time with him. That was true. It was more true than anything else I said that week. I spent Friday evening cooking. I made his favorites: baked chicken, rice and gravy, collard greens with smoked turkey, cornbread from scratch. I also made a sweet potato pie because he has loved sweet potato pie since before I was born, and because I wanted that night to feel like something, not just a meal. Saturday afternoon, I loaded everything into the car. I got dressed, and I drove to Sullivan Avenue. Priscilla thought I was going to pick up my father to bring him somewhere. She did not know I was going to his house. She did not know I was not going to her parents' anniversary dinner at all. I had thought about this carefully. I had thought about whether I was being petty, whether I was cutting off my nose to spite my face, whether I was creating a problem larger than the one I was solving. And I kept coming back to the same answer. There was no version of that dinner table that was acceptable to me. There was no version where I sat in Dwight and Marlene's living room making small talk with their orthodontist friends, while my father sat alone in his house on Sullivan Avenue because my wife had decided he was not at that level. That was not a dinner I was capable of attending. When I pulled up to my father's house, he was on the porch. He always knows when I'm coming. I think he hears my particular engine from half a block away after all these years. He was wearing his good shirt, the navy one, even though I hadn't told him to dress up. He stood up when he saw me carrying the bags and he said, "Boy, what did you do?" I said, "I cooked." He held the door open for me. His house smelled the way it has always smelled, cedar and coffee and something warm underneath that I have never been able to name. I set everything out on the kitchen table. He stood in the doorway watching me arrange it all, and he shook his head slowly, like he was trying to figure something out. We sat down. We ate. He said grace the way he always says it, long, unhurried, like he has nowhere else to be, and God has all the time in the world. And then we ate. And we talked. He told me about a documentary he had watched about the construction of the Brooklyn Bridge, and he talked about the ironworkers with the kind of reverence that men like my father reserve for other men who work with their hands. I told him about a problem I'd been turning over at work for 2 weeks that I hadn't told anyone else about, and he listened without interrupting. And when I finished, he asked one question that cut directly to the center of the thing I had been missing. That is who my father is. Somewhere around the sweet potato pie, he looked at me and said, "You going to tell me what tonight is actually about?" I set my fork down. I told him. I told him everything. The phone call, what Priscilla said, the dinner I didn't go to. I told him quietly, and I didn't editorialize much. I just said what happened. He was quiet for a long time after I finished. He looked at his hands on the table. Finally, he said, "Owen, you didn't have to do all this." I said, "Yes, I did, Pop." He said, "Your wife." I said, "Your wife." I said, "I know, I'm going to handle it. But tonight I needed to be here." He nodded slowly. He picked up his fork again. He took a bite of the sweet potato pie. And then he said something I have thought about every day since. He said, "A man can always find another table, but there's only one man who taught you how to sit at one." We did the dishes together after, the way we used to when I was growing up. Him washing, me drying, the radio on low. And I thought about all the Saturday mornings in that kitchen, all the meals at that table, all the times those big cracked hands had handed me something I needed before I even knew I needed it. I drove home late. Priscilla was already in bed. I sat in the living room for a while in the dark, not angry, not sad exactly, just clear. I felt very clear about things. The next morning, I told her what I had done. I told her I had heard the phone call. I told her I was not going to perform outrage at her. I was not going to yell and make demands and give her something to argue against. I told her calmly and directly what I had heard, what I felt, and what it meant to me. I told her my father is not a decoration I can swap out when he doesn't match the occasion. He is not a liability to be managed. He is the reason I know how to work, how to keep a promise, how to be in a room and not need it to validate me. Everything she has ever said she loved about me came from somewhere. It came from those hands that smell like iron and solvent and 40 years of showing up. I told her I needed her to reckon with that, not perform it, not apologize once and move on. Actually reckon with it, she cried. I don't say that to make her the villain of this story, because I don't think of her that way. She had absorbed something from somewhere, some idea about what counted and what didn't, what kind of man was worth respecting, and she had let it live in her unchecked for too long. She cried, and she said she was ashamed, and I believe she meant it. But I also told her shame is just the beginning. What matters is what you do after it. She called my father herself 2 days later. I did not ask her to. I did not know she was going to. She told me about it afterward. She said she apologized to him directly, and he received it graciously, the way he receives everything, with patience and without theatrics. He told her he appreciated the call. He probably told her something wise that she's still turning over in her head. That is who my father is. He came to Thanksgiving 3 weeks later, sat at the head of the table because I put his place there. Dwight and my father ended up talking about a car restoration project my father had worked on in the early 80s. Turned out Dwight had owned the same model in college. They talked for 40 minutes. Marlene asked my father twice about how he made his cornbread because Priscilla had brought the leftover and Marlene hadn't been able to stop thinking about it. My father shook Dwight's hand at the end of the night with both of his, the way he does. That two-handed shake, that means something. Driving home, Priscilla was quiet for a while. Then she said, "Your father is remarkable." I said, "I know." She said, "I'm sorry it took me this long to see it." I didn't say anything for a moment. Then I said, "Just don't forget it. I am telling you this because I know some of you have a father like mine. A man who never needed a title to have dignity. A man whose hands told the whole story of his life, and whose life was a good one, regardless of what table he was or wasn't invited to sit at. And I know some of you have looked away from something you should have looked at." I did. For too long, I did. There's a particular kind of shame in realizing you let the person who gave you everything be made to feel small, even once, even indirectly, even by someone else's words you didn't correct. I can't undo that. I can only carry it as instruction. My father called me last Sunday. He's doing well. He started going to a woodworking class on Thursday mornings at the rec center. Says he wants to make something for the grandchildren he fully expects me to produce in the near future. And he said this in a tone that left very little room for discussion. I laughed. He laughed. Before we hung up, he said, "You're a good son, Owen." I sat with that for a while after we got off the phone. I am trying to be. I've been thinking about what made that night with my father feel the way it did. Not the anger. I told you the anger wasn't the loudest thing in the room. It was the clarity. That's what I keep coming back to. When I sat on the edge of that bed in the dark, what settled over me wasn't rage. It was the plain, quiet understanding that I had let something go on too long by choosing comfort over honesty. That's how these things work. It's never one moment. It's 100 small silences. A comment you don't address. A tension you smooth over. A thing you tell yourself is just friction, when really it's a slow erosion of something that matters. I had been making those choices for years, and the night I heard Priscilla on the phone, I had to reckon with the fact that my silence had a cost, and my father was the one paying it. What I did that Saturday wasn't revenge. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't trying to make a point or win something. I brought food to my father's house because I needed to stand somewhere solid, and that kitchen on Sullivan Avenue was the most solid place I knew. Chester didn't need me to explain everything to him. He already understood more than I said. That is what a life of quiet integrity produces in a man, the ability to read what's underneath without needing it spelled out. And here is what I've come to understand about the way things unfolded. What you practice, you become. Priscilla had practiced a certain kind of looking at who counted, at what kind of man was worth respecting, and she had practiced it long enough that it stopped feeling like a choice. It just felt like the truth. That is how bias calcifies, not with malice necessarily, but with repetition, with small uncorrected assumptions that harden over time into something that feels like fact. The reckoning she had to do after that night wasn't comfortable, but it was necessary. And she did it, not perfectly, not all at once, but genuinely. She called my father herself. She sat with what she had done. That takes something. It takes the kind of honesty that most people avoid, because it requires you to admit that a version of yourself you preferred to ignore was real. That's what I mean when I say this story isn't really about one dinner. It's about what we owe the people who made us. Chester worked 40 years with his hands so I could work with my mind. Every value I have that is worth anything, the steadiness, the follow-through, the ability to stay calm when things come apart, he taught me that. Not in speeches, in the way he showed up day after day without needing applause for it. A man like that doesn't need to be at the right table. He is the reason you know how to sit at one. I'm telling you this because some of you are in the middle of a silence right now. You know what I mean. There is something you have been letting go because addressing it feels like too much, because the moment passed, because you told yourself it wasn't that serious. I am asking you to reconsider. The moment always passes, but what you do with it, or don't do with it, stays. My father is well. He is making furniture on Thursday mornings and reminding me gently and persistently that he would like grandchildren at some point before he is too old to teach them anything useful. I told him he's got time. He gave me the look that said he would be the judge of that. I am still learning from him. That's the thing about a good father. He doesn't stop teaching just because you're grown. You just get better at paying attention.